Did he hit you again? I swear I'm gonna kill him!
The bruises were fresh, dark purple against her brown skin. Min-jae Park had seen violence his entire life, had caused most of it if he was being honest, but this made his blood run cold. By morning Derek would be gone. Not missing. Just gone. What happens when the most dangerous man in Seoul becomes the only safe place for a woman with nowhere to run? This is a story about forbidden love, protection, and the moment everything changed. But to understand that moment you need to know how we got here. Her name was Jasmine Williams, and 3 years ago she thought Seoul would be her fresh start. 28 years old, full of dreams, she'd packed her life into 2 suitcases and moved halfway across the world to teach English. The city embraced her, the lights of Gangnam, the warmth of her students' laughter, the promise of adventure in every unfamiliar street. And then she met Derek Sullivan. He was charming in the way that dangerous men often are. An American expat working in finance, or so he said. Designer suits, easy smile, the kind of confidence that made you believe every word. He pursued her with flowers and fancy dinners, made her feel like she was the only woman in the entire city. She fell fast. Too fast. When the budget cuts came and Jasmine lost her teaching position, Derek was right there with a solution. He'd support her, he said. She could take her time finding the right opportunity. She didn't need to worry about money. He loved her. He'd take care of everything. That's how it starts, isn't it? With love. With promises. With someone convincing you that depending on them is the same thing as being loved by them. By the time Jasmine realized what was happening, she was already trapped. No job. No savings. Everything went into their joint account that somehow only Derek could access. Her friends back home seemed so far away, and the ones she'd made in Seoul had slowly disappeared from her life. Derek didn't like her going out without him. Derek needed to know where she was. Derek said she was being paranoid, too sensitive, always overreacting. So Jasmine did what she had to do. She took a position as a live-in housekeeper for wealthy households, taking whatever work she could find to make ends meet. The money was good. Seoul's elite paid well for discretion and quality. But more than that, the work gave her something Derek couldn't touch. Hours away from his watchful eyes. Moments where she could breathe. Her current placement was in Hanamdong, Seoul's most exclusive neighborhood, where old money and new power lived behind high walls and security gates. The Park estate. She kept her natural curls pulled back in a neat bun, moved through the enormous house with quiet grace, and tried not to think about the growing fear that lived behind her eyes. Late at night, when Derek was finally asleep and she could think clearly, Jasmine made plans. Save enough money. Leave Derek. Maybe return to graduate school, finish what she'd started before everything fell apart. Maybe just disappear and start over somewhere he'd never find her. But plans require time. And time was the one thing she was running out of. If you're finding this story powerful so far, please hit that subscribe button. We share true stories about love, survival, and justice, stories that need to be heard. Now let me tell you about Min-jae Park. At 35, Min-jae was everything his family's legacy demanded and nothing they expected. Third-generation Korean Mafia, born into violence the way some people are born into medicine or law. It was the family business. But Min-jae had evolved into something his grandfather and father never were. Something more calculated, more dangerous, more controlled. To the outside world he was a legitimate businessman. His luxury real estate empire stretched across Seoul and into international markets. He spoke 5 languages fluently, collected first-edition books, could discuss philosophy with the same ease he discussed profit margins. His name appeared in business magazines, not police reports. But make no mistake, Min-jae Park was exactly what he appeared to be when you looked closer. The kind of man who solved problems that couldn't be solved with lawyers or contracts. The kind of man other dangerous men called when they needed something handled quietly. He lived alone in his massive estate, a fortress disguised as a home. Previous housekeepers had quit, making polite excuses about other opportunities, when the real reason was always the same. They'd seen something, heard something, understood exactly what kind of business was being conducted in the study behind closed doors. Min-jae had rules. 2 of them, unbreakable: protect family and never harm women or children. The second rule was written in blood and memory. He'd been 12 years old when his mother died. The official story was an accident, she fell, they said, tragic and unexpected. But Min-jae had seen the Bruises before. Had heard his father's rage echoing through their home. Had watched his mother flinch at shadows. When she died, his father remarried within months and no one spoke of her again. Min-jae spoke of her often, though never out loud. She lived in his rules, in his reputation, in the way he treated everyone who entered his world. He was ruthless in business, yes. Cold when he needed to be. Capable of violence that would make most people sick. But in his private space, in those quiet moments between the chaos, there was something else. Something gentle. Something that read philosophy at 3 in the morning and understood that power meant nothing if you used it carelessly. The contradiction was what made him dangerous. People expected monsters to look like monsters. They didn't expect them to pour you tea and ask about your favorite book. Jasmine's first day at the Park estate was 2 months ago. She'd been nervous naturally. The agency had been vague about Mr. Park, which usually meant trouble. Wealthy clients were one thing, difficult clients were another. But the pay was substantial, and Jasmine needed everyone she could save. Min-jae barely noticed her at first. She was just another staff member, someone to manage the house while he managed everything else. He gave her instructions through his assistant, stayed out of her way, expected the same in return. But then she reorganized his library. Most people would have arranged the books alphabetically by author. Neat, logical, expected. Jasmine organized them by theme, by the conversations she saw happening between different works. She left small notes too tucked into certain volumes. This connects to the book 3 shelves down. These two authors were responding to each other, even if they never met. Min-jae found the first note by accident, late one Thursday night when he couldn't sleep. He stood in his library reading her careful handwriting and something shifted. Someone had seen his collection not as decoration or status, but as what it actually was. A conversation across time and thought. Their first real conversation happened by chance. Late night, both in the kitchen for different reasons. Jasmine was making tea, her hands shaking slightly. She'd had a particularly bad evening with Derek, though Min-jae didn't know that yet. He was there after what he vaguely called a business meeting, though the tension in his shoulders suggested it hadn't gone smoothly. They spoke carefully, the way strangers do when they're sharing space but not quite sharing trust. He asked about her background. She kept it brief, taught English, taking time to explore other opportunities. He mentioned the library reorganization. She apologized if she'd overstepped. He told her it was the first time the room had made sense. There was a moment, brief but significant, where their eyes met and they both understood something without saying it. Mutual respect. Clear boundaries. An acknowledgement that they were both hiding parts of themselves and that was acceptable. As she was leaving the kitchen, Min-jae noticed the book on the counter. One of his, from the library. She'd been reading it on her break. The cover was worn, well-loved. Toni Morrison. Beloved. He didn't comment. But he noticed. He always noticed. That was 2 months ago. Now everything had changed. Because this Monday morning, Jasmine walked into the Park estate with makeup carefully covering her left cheekbone. And Min-jae Park, who'd built an empire on observation and calculation, saw what she was trying to hide. The bruises were fresh. Dark purple against her brown skin. And by morning, Derek would be gone. But what happened between that Monday morning and Derek's disappearance? That's the story we're about to tell you. A story about the moment the most dangerous man in Seoul decided that some things mattered more than his carefully constructed rules. That some people were worth breaking every boundary he'd ever built. Here's a question for you. If you were in Jasmine's position, would you trust someone like Min-jae Park? Could you accept help from someone you knew was dangerous? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm genuinely curious what you think. The week was about to unfold in ways neither of them could predict. And it all started with those bruises, and a man who'd spent his whole life running from his past, suddenly finding a reason to face it head-on. Monday morning arrived with the kind of oppressive humidity that makes Seoul feel like it's wrapped in a wet blanket. Jasmine Williams walked through the gates of the Park estate at exactly 7:30, the same time she always did. Punctuality was one of the few things she could still control in her life. Min-jae was in his study, reviewing contracts that didn't need reviewing. The truth was he'd been listening for her arrival. Over 2 months, her presence had become part of the rhythm of his home. The soft click of the side entrance. The quiet way she moved through the halls. The almost imperceptible shift in the atmosphere when she was there. But this morning something was different. He found her in the kitchen, already preparing his coffee the way he preferred it. Strong, black, no sugar. She had her back to him and for a moment, everything seemed normal. Then she turned and Min-jae Park, who'd spent 20 years training himself to reveal nothing, had to work to keep his expression neutral. The makeup was good. Professional, even. The kind that's designed to cover rather than enhance. But Min-jae hadn't survived in his world by missing details. The foundation on her left cheekbone was slightly thicker than on the right. The color didn't quite match her skin tone in the morning light. And there, just barely visible along her jawline, a shadow that makeup couldn't fully hide. He said nothing. Not yet. You have to understand something about Min-jae Park. He'd been trained since childhood to observe, to calculate, to wait for the right moment. Hasty reactions got people killed in his world. But more than that, he understood something that most people don't. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let someone keep their dignity. Let them maintain their story. Give them space to decide when they're ready to reveal the truth. So he took his coffee, thanked her with the same quiet courtesy he always showed, and returned to his study. But he was watching now. Really watching. Throughout Monday he noticed things. The way she kept her left side turned away from him when they crossed paths. How she positioned herself so the morning sun never hit her face directly. The careful way she moved, as if her body was reminding her of pain she was trying to forget. Tuesday she wore a high-necked blouse despite the heat. When she reached up to dust the higher shelves in his library, he saw her wince. Just slightly, barely noticeable, but it was there. Her ribs, maybe. Or her shoulder. Wednesday she apologized 6 times in the span of an hour. For coffee that was perfect. For a meal she'd prepared exactly to his specifications. For walking past him in the hallway. For existing, essentially. Each apology felt like a flinch, like she was expecting punishment that he would never deliver. Min-jae had seen this before. In his mother. In other women who'd crossed paths with his world. The constant apologies, the hypervigilance, the way they made themselves smaller and smaller, hoping that if they just took up less space maybe the violence would stop. It never did. By Thursday, his hands were clenching into fists every time he thought about it. Min-jae Park, who prided himself on control, who'd built an empire on his ability to remain calm under pressure, was struggling to maintain his composure. Thursday evening, everything crystallized. Jasmine was in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner. Min-jae was in the adjacent sitting room, ostensibly reading, but actually listening to the familiar sounds of her routine. The water running. The gentle clink of dishes. The soft hum she made when she thought no one was listening. Then the crash. Glass shattering against tile. The sound seemed to echo through the entire house. But it was the silence that followed that made Min-jae move. Not the normal silence of someone bending to clean up a simple accident. This was the silence of absolute terror. He walked into the kitchen and found her frozen. Completely still. Her eyes fixed on the shattered glass at her feet, her hands trembling so violently she'd clasped them together to try to stop it. She wasn't crying, but her breathing was rapid, shallow, the breathing of someone in the grip of panic. Min-jae knew exactly what this was. Post-traumatic response. Fight or flight. The body remembering violence and waiting for it to happen again. He spoke softly, the same tone he'd use approaching a frightened animal. Come. Non-threatening. Measured. He told her to stay still, that he'd handle the glass. She started apologizing, a stream of frantic, breathless apologies about being clumsy, about causing trouble, about wasting his time. Her voice was shaking as badly as her hands. Min-jae knelt and began picking up the larger pieces of glass, his movements slow and deliberate. He told her accidents happen. That it was just a glass easily replaced. That she wasn't in trouble. That everything was fine. But even as he said these things, he was observing. The way she kept her eyes down. How she was still trembling. The split-second flinch when he moved to grab a piece of glass near her foot. He helped her clean up the rest, their hands occasionally brushing as they worked. Hers were ice-cold despite the summer heat. When the last piece was swept away, she finally looked at him, and for just a moment, he saw past the carefully constructed facade. She was terrified. Not of him. Of something else. Someone else. She made an excuse about being clumsy today, about not getting enough sleep. Her laugh was hollow, unconvincing. Min-jae didn't push. He simply told her to be careful, that he didn't want her to get hurt. The irony of those words hung in the air between them. Too late, his expression said. She's already hurt. After she left that evening, Min-jae stood in his study, staring out at the Seoul skyline. His world operated on rules. You didn't interfere in domestic situations unless they directly affected business. You didn't involve yourself in the personal lives of employees. You maintained boundaries, kept distance, protected your interests by staying detached. But standing there, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, Min-jae felt 12 years old again. Sitting in his childhood home. Hearing his mother in the next room. Knowing something was wrong. Doing nothing. Being too young, too powerless, too afraid. He'd sworn, standing at her funeral, that he'd never be powerless again. His past wouldn't let him ignore this. Not this time. Friday arrived with Jasmine's smile slightly more forced than usual, her makeup slightly heavier. She worked through the day with mechanical efficiency, and at precisely 5 o'clock she began gathering her things. Min-jae had positioned himself in the upstairs study, the one with windows that overlooked the front entrance. He told himself he was working. He knew he was waiting. At 5:15 the car arrived. Flashy. A silver BMW that screamed borrowed money and insecure masculinity. The driver's side door opened and Derek Sullivan stepped out. This was the first time Min-jae had seen him in person, though he'd glimpsed him from a distance during previous pickups. Derek was exactly what Min-jae expected. Handsome in a conventional way, dressed in designer labels, moving with the kind of confidence that comes from never having faced real consequences. Jasmine emerged from the house and Min-jae watched the transformation. She'd been relaxed seconds ago, relatively at ease. The moment she saw Derek, her entire body language changed. Shoulders slightly hunched. Steps measured. Smile fixed in place like armor. Derek's body language told a different story. Possessive. Proprietary. He walked around the car to meet her, and his hand immediately went to her lower back. But it wasn't the gentle touch of a caring partner. Min-jae could see from his vantage point how Derek's fingers pressed into her spine. Too tight. Too controlling. The touch of someone asserting ownership. Derek leaned in to kiss her, and Jasmine turned her head slightly so his lips met her cheek instead of her mouth. A small rebellion. Derek's expression flickered, irritation quickly masked with a smile. His hand tightened on her back as he guided her to the passenger side. Before she got in the car, Jasmine glanced up at the house. For just a second, her eyes met the window where Min-jae stood. He didn't move, didn't acknowledge the moment. But something passed between them. An understanding. A silent acknowledgement of something they couldn't name yet. Then she was in the car and they were gone. Min-jae stood at that window long after the BMW disappeared down the street. He was thinking about Jasmine's perspective, trying to understand how she'd ended up here. Because that's what he did. He analyzed, he strategized, he understood his opponents by understanding their victims. It had started sweet. They always do. 3 years ago, Jasmine had been new to Seoul, excited about her fresh start. Then Derek appeared, charming, attentive, seemingly successful. He'd pursued her with intensity, the kind that feels like romance when you're the focus of it. Flowers delivered to her school. Surprise weekend trips. That feeling of being chosen, being special. The changes were gradual. So gradual she didn't notice until she was already caught. First there was concern. Derek worried about her walking home alone at night from school dinners. He'd insist on picking her up. Sweet, right? Protective. Except those pickups became expected. Then demanded. Then monitored. He worried about her male co-workers. Were they flirting with her? She should probably keep her distance. Just to be safe. Just because he loved her so much he couldn't stand the thought of anyone disrespecting her. He worried about her friends from home. They didn't understand their relationship. They were probably jealous. Maybe she should text them less, call them less. Focus on building their life together. Each request seemed reasonable in isolation. Each one came wrapped in love and concern. But together they built a cage. When Jasmine lost her teaching job, Derek was right there with a solution. She could take time off. He'd cover expenses. She didn't need to worry about money. He loved her. He'd take care of everything. Except taking care of everything meant her paychecks from housekeeping work went into their joint account. An account she could deposit into but not withdraw from. An account Derek controlled completely. He'd handle the bills, he said. She was so stressed and he just wanted to help. The financial trap was perfect. Ancient and effective. Without money, where could she go? The monitoring escalated. Derek needed to know where she was always. He'd check her phone, just glancing, just curious, just because he cared. He'd ask about her day in exhaustive detail, remembering everything, comparing her stories, catching any inconsistencies. Jasmine found herself rehearsing conversations before they happened. Planning her routes to avoid any detours he might question. Deleting innocent text messages because explaining them was harder than hiding them. Then came the gambling. Derek had always liked poker nights with his expat friends, but over the past 6 months, it had become something else. Online betting. Casino trips. Money disappearing from accounts he'd promised were for their future. He'd win sometimes, come home euphoric, generous, almost like his old self. But mostly he lost. And when he lost, he drank. And when he drank, he blamed her. If she wasn't so expensive. If she contributed more. If she hadn't made him worry so much that he needed to blow off steam. Everything became her fault. Every loss, every problem, every bad day. The first time he pushed her was 4 months ago. She'd questioned a charge on their account, $1,500 at a casino. He'd exploded. Not hitting, not yet. Just a hard shove that sent her stumbling backward into the wall. Then immediate apologies. Tears. Promises. He was stressed. Work was terrible. He'd never do it again. He loved her so much. She believed him. Or maybe she just needed to believe him because the alternative was too terrifying. The pushes became more frequent. Then came the grab that left bruises on her arms. Then the night he'd shaken her so hard her head snapped back. Always followed by apologies. Always with explanations that somehow made it her fault. Wednesday night, 5 days ago, Jasmine had been 20 minutes late getting home from the Park estate. Traffic on the Olympic Expressway had been impossible. She texted Derek but he didn't respond. When she walked through their apartment door he was waiting. How dare she keep him waiting? Who was she really with? 20 minutes was too long for traffic. She must think he was stupid. She tried to explain, to show him the traffic reports on her phone. He grabbed the phone from her hand and threw it against the wall. Then he grabbed her and shoved her hard into the same wall. Her cheekbone had connected with the corner of a picture frame. That's when she'd understood. This wasn't going to stop. This was only going to get worse. Eventually he was going to kill her whether he meant to or not. But leaving wasn't simple. Derek had made sure of that. Her visa was through him. He'd helped her navigate the paperwork when her teaching visa expired. He'd threatened, during their arguments, to report her to immigration. He had friends, he said. Connections. He could make her life very difficult. He could claim she'd violated visa terms, that she'd overstayed, that she'd worked illegally. None of it was true, but proving that from outside Korea would be impossible. And even if she managed to leave, where would she go? Her family back home barely scraped by. Her friends had their own problems. She had no savings, everything was in accounts she couldn't access. Jasmine was trapped. Truly, completely trapped. And Derek knew it. That's what made him so bold. That's what made the violence escalate. She was his. That's how he saw it. His to control. His to punish. His to keep. But Derek Sullivan had made one critical mistake. He'd left marks that someone else could see. Saturday morning Min-jae made a phone call. In his world, information was currency, and he employed some of the best information brokers in Seoul. The man who answered his call, we'll call him Mr. Kim, specialized in background checks that went beyond anything a legal firm could provide. Min-jae gave him a name, Derek Sullivan. American expat, approximately 32 years old, supposedly working in finance, living in Yongsan-gu. He wanted everything. Employment history, financial records, criminal background, known associates, travel history, everything. Mr. Kim asked how soon he needed it. Min-jae told him 6 hours. Mr. Kim delivered in 4. The file that arrived on Min-jae's encrypted tablet was comprehensive and damning. Derek Sullivan wasn't just an abuser. He was a predator with a pattern. Current employment status: unemployed. He'd been fired from his finance position 7 months ago for irregularities, a polite corporate term for fraud. He'd been cooking his own expense reports, using client funds for personal gambling debts. The company had quietly let him go rather than face the publicity of a trial. Since then, nothing. No job applications. No legitimate income. He was living entirely off what Jasmine earned, supplemented by deeper and deeper gambling debts. Speaking of which, Derek owed $47,000 to various creditors. Online betting sites, casino markers, personal loans from the kind of people who don't use legal collection methods. He was drowning in debt and the water was rising fast. But here's what made Min-jae's blood run cold. Derek had done this before. 5 years ago in Boston. A woman named Sarah Chin. They dated for 2 years. The pattern was identical. Initial charm, gradual isolation, financial control, escalating violence. Sarah had finally gotten a restraining order after Derek put her in the hospital with 3 broken ribs and a fractured eye socket. Derek had skipped town before the trial. Fled to New York, then eventually to Seoul where American domestic violence charges couldn't easily follow him. He'd left Sarah to deal with medical bills and trauma while he started fresh. Until he found Jasmine and started the whole cycle again. The file included photographs too. Derek with various women at Seoul clubs. Derek at high-stakes poker tables. Derek stumbling drunk out of bars in Itaewon. And most recently, Derek meeting with a loan shark known for particularly brutal collection methods. Min-jae sat back in his chair, the tablet dark in his hands. He'd killed men for less than what was in this file. Had ended people for smaller infractions against his business interests. This was personal, which made it different, but not in the way most people would think. This was more dangerous than business. Because business was about logic and profit and strategic calculation. This was about rage that he'd spent 23 years trying to control. Rage at his father. Rage at everyone who'd seen his mother suffering and done nothing. Rage at a world that let men like Derek Sullivan move from victim to victim, leaving destruction in their wake. But here was the problem. Jasmine didn't know what Min-jae really was. Oh, she suspected something. You don't work in someone's home for 2 months without noticing things. The late-night meetings in his study. The men who visited and left looking nervous. The phone calls conducted in rapid Korean that stopped when she entered the room. The way other wealthy families in the neighborhood treated Min-jae with a respect that bordered on fear. She knew he was powerful. She probably guessed he was dangerous. But she didn't know the full truth. Didn't know about the bodies that had been disappeared. The rivals who'd learned painful lessons. The empire built on fear as much as respect. If Min-jae acted, really acted the way he wanted to, Jasmine would know. She'd understand exactly what kind of man employed her. What kind of world she'd been living adjacent to. And maybe she'd run. Maybe she'd be smart enough to be afraid of him too. Min-jae stood and walked to his window, looking out over the estate grounds. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and red. Beautiful and violent at the same time, like everything in his life. He thought about his mother. About the 12-year-old boy who'd listened to her cry through walls and done nothing because he didn't know what nothing cost. About the man he'd become because of that boy's helplessness. He thought about rules and boundaries and all the careful structures he'd built to convince himself he was different from his father. And then he thought about Jasmine's hands shaking as she picked up broken glass. About the fear in her eyes when she'd flinched at a sudden movement. About a woman trapped with nowhere to turn, slowly being destroyed by a man who thought he'd never face consequences. Some things matter more than secrets. Some things matter more than carefully constructed boundaries. Some things matter more than protecting yourself from being known. Min-jae made his decision. Derek Sullivan had hurt his last woman. If you've been moved by this story so far, please take a moment to subscribe. We're sharing stories that matter, stories about survival, justice, and the complicated nature of protection. Your support helps us continue telling these important tales. Sunday evening. Min-jae wasn't expecting her. Jasmine wasn't scheduled to work on Sundays. It was her day off, the one day she could theoretically rest, though he suspected her version of rest still involved Derek's surveillance and control. The gate alert chimed at 11 p.m. Min-jae checked the security camera and felt his chest tighten. Jasmine stood at the pedestrian entrance, illuminated by the security lights. Even through the camera he could see she was trembling. He opened the gate remotely and met her at the door. The makeup was gone. Maybe she'd run out of time to apply it. Maybe she'd stopped caring about hiding it. Either way, Min-jae could see everything now. Fresh bruise on her jaw, still swelling. Split lip, the blood dried in the corner. Her left eye was starting to swell shut. Fingerprint bruises around her throat. She was trying not to cry. Failing but trying. Her arms were wrapped around herself like she was physically holding herself together. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Could she sleep in the staff quarters? Just for one night. She was sorry to bother him. She knew it was late. She knew she wasn't supposed to be here. She'd leave first thing in the morning. Min-jae cut through her apologies with 2 words. What happened? And Jasmine broke. The story came out in fragments, disjointed and raw. Derek had gone through her phone while she was showering. Found text messages from a male coworker. Someone from her old teaching job who'd reached out about a group dinner, a casual gathering of former staff. Completely innocent. Derek hadn't seen it that way. Who was this guy? Why was he texting her? Was she meeting him behind Derek's back? Was she cheating on him? After everything Derek had done for her, this is how she repaid him. She tried to explain. The man was happily married. It was a group event. She hadn't even responded to the message yet. But Derek was already gone, already convinced, already grabbing her. He'd shaken her first. Screaming in her face about respect, about loyalty, about how she was making him look like a fool. Then he'd hit her. Open-handed across the face, hard enough that she'd tasted blood. She'd run. Locked herself in the bathroom. Listened to him rage outside the door for 20 minutes before he finally left. Heading to a bar, probably, or to one of his gambling haunts. Jasmine had waited until she heard the apartment door slam. Then she'd grabbed her wallet and her phone and just walked. She'd wandered for hours trying to figure out where to go. Every friend was Derek's friend first. Every place she could think of felt unsafe. And then she'd found herself at the gates of the Park estate. The only place that felt solid. The only person who'd treated her with quiet respect, who'd never raised his voice, who'd helped her clean up broken glass without making her feel broken herself. She looked at Min-jae with eyes that were desperate and ashamed and exhausted all at once. I have nowhere else to go. I'm sorry. I'll leave tomorrow. I couldn't go back there tonight. Min-jae stood very still. He was processing multiple things simultaneously. The rage that threatened to consume him. The calculation of what needed to happen next. The woman in front of him who'd trusted him with her vulnerability. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, controlled, gentle even, but underneath it was steel. You're not going back there ever. And you're not leaving tomorrow. Jasmine started to protest. She couldn't impose. Derek would come looking. She didn't want to cause trouble. Min-jae held up a hand. Let me be very clear. You are safe here. You will stay here as long as you need. And Derek Sullivan will not be a problem for you anymore. Something in his tone made Jasmine pause. Made her really look at him. In that moment, she saw past the polite employer, past the wealthy businessman, past the carefully constructed facade. She saw exactly what Min-jae Park was capable of. What are you going to do? Her voice was barely audible. Min-jae smiled. It wasn't a comforting smile. Don't worry about that. Just rest. We'll talk in the morning. He guided her to the guest suite, not the staff quarters but the actual guest suite with its comfortable bed and private bathroom. He brought her ice for her face, antiseptic for her lip, clean clothes to change into. He told her the doors would lock from the inside, that she was completely safe, that she should try to sleep. As he was leaving, Jasmine called out to him. Min-jae. He turned. Thank you. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything she couldn't say. Thank you for seeing. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being the one person who didn't look away. Min-jae nodded once. Then he closed the door and walked back to his study. It was 11:45 p.m. Min-jae picked up his phone and began making calls. By 2 a.m., 3 people would be mobilized. By morning, Derek Sullivan's world would implode. But what Min-jae did next would change both their lives forever. Because once you step into the darkness to protect someone, you can't pretend the darkness doesn't exist. And once someone sees you clearly, really sees what you're capable of, there's no going back to comfortable illusions. Min-jae was about to cross a line he'd carefully avoided for years. And Jasmine was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous man in the room is the only one who can save you. Here's my question for you. Do you think Jasmine made the right choice coming to Min-jae? When you have nowhere else to turn, can you accept help from someone you know operates outside the law? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. The night was just beginning. And by morning, Derek Sullivan would learn a lesson about consequences that he should have learned a long time ago. 2 a.m. The hour when Seoul's nightlife begins to fade and the city holds its breath before morning. Min-jae Park sat in his study, phone in hand, and made 3 calls that would change everything. The first call went to his head of security, a man who'd worked for the Park family for 15 years and had never once questioned an order. Min-jae gave him a name, a description, and a location. Derek Sullivan. American expat. Likely at one of the foreigner bars in Itaewon, probably Gold Bar or Thursday Party, places where expats with gambling problems went to feel important while drowning their failures in overpriced whiskey. Find him. Bring him to the warehouse in Seongsadong. No marks. No scene. Just make him disappear from wherever he is. The second call went to his financial strategist, the man who handled the parts of Min-jae's empire that couldn't appear on any legitimate balance sheet. He needed $10,000 in cash, American hundreds, by 4 a.m. He also needed Derek Sullivan's debts cataloged and ready to be cleared. All of them. Every casino, every loan shark, every betting site. He wanted a complete financial erasure. The third call was to his tech associate, a woman who could make digital footprints vanish like they'd never existed. Min-jae gave her Jasmine's full name and Derek's information. He wanted Derek scrubbed from Jasmine's life, every shared account closed and funds transferred to accounts in Jasmine's name alone, every digital connection severed, every trace of his control eliminated. He also wanted Jasmine's visa status secured independently, completely separate from any connection to Derek. His legal team would handle it, but he needed it done yesterday. All 3 people responded the same way: it would be done. This is the thing about real power. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's a series of quiet phone calls at 2 in the morning that reshape reality by dawn. Min-jae sat back in his chair and waited. He didn't feel satisfaction exactly. This wasn't about revenge, though revenge would be a side benefit. This was about correction. About restoring a balance that had been broken. About making sure a predator couldn't hunt anymore. At 3:45 a.m. his phone buzzed. His security chief, package secured. No complications. Derek Sullivan had been found at Thursday party, drunk and losing badly at the poker table in the back room. He'd been in debt to some dangerous people, and when two well-dressed Korean men approached him with a friendly suggestion that he step outside, Derek's instinct for self-preservation kicked in. He went quietly, assuming this was about money he owed. He wasn't entirely wrong. They brought him to one of Min-jae's properties in Seongsadong, an old warehouse that officially belonged to a subsidiary of one of his real estate companies. Completely off the books. Completely private. The kind of place where conversations happened that could never be repeated. Derek was scared when they arrived, but still maintaining that false bravado that men like him wear like armor. Demanding to know what this was about. Threatening to call the police. Acting like he had any power in this situation at all. Then Min-jae walked in. There's a particular kind of fear that happens when someone realizes they've miscalculated. When the world they thought they understood suddenly reveals itself to be much more dangerous than they'd imagined. Derek felt that fear the moment Min-jae stepped into the light. Because Derek might have been stupid, might have been a coward, might have been a predator, but he wasn't so far gone that he couldn't recognize a real apex predator when he saw one. Min-jae didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. He simply laid out everything he knew. The gambling debts, $47,000 itemized by creditor. The fired job, the lies about employment. The previous girlfriend in Boston, Sarah Chin, the restraining order Derek had fled. The pattern of abuse, isolation, financial control, escalating violence. And then, most importantly, what Derek had done to Jasmine. The bruises. The control. The terror. The split lip and swollen jaw that she'd arrived with just hours earlier. Derek did what cowards always do. He made excuses. Jasmine was dramatic. She exaggerated. She didn't understand how stressful his life was. She provoked him. It wasn't as bad as it looked. Min-jae let him finish. Then he presented Derek with two choices. Choice 1. Take $10,000 in cash. Use it to book a flight leaving Korea within 24 hours. Never contact Jasmine again. No calls, no emails, no texts, no social media, no third-party messages. In exchange, all his debts would be cleared. Every single one. He'd walk away clean, free to start over somewhere else. But if he ever came back, if he ever contacted Jasmine again, if he ever even thought about her too hard, well, Min-jae would take that very personally. Choice 2. Stay. Face the consequences of his debts, and the men he owed money to weren't nearly as generous as Min-jae was being. Also face the consequences of what he'd done to Jasmine. Min-jae had connections in immigration and law enforcement, in places Derek couldn't begin to imagine. He could make Derek's life a special kind of hell. Or he could make Derek disappear entirely, in a way that no one would ever find him or ask questions about. Min-jae delivered both options in the same calm, measured tone he'd used to discuss a business contract. Then he checked his watch and told Derek he had 60 seconds to decide. Derek's true nature revealed itself in that moment. No righteous anger. No defense of his love for Jasmine. No claim that he deserved another chance. Just pure, calculating self-interest. He took the money. Min-jae had known he would. Cowards always choose the easy exit when it's offered. They only fight when they think they can win without consequence. By 4:30 a.m., Derek was at Incheon International Airport, booking the first flight to Los Angeles. By 6 p.m. Monday evening, he was 35,000 feet in the air, leaving Korea and Jasmine behind forever. His debts were cleared. Min-jae had made the payments personally, considering it a small price for peace of mind. His apartment lease had been terminated, his belongings put in storage for 30 days before disposal. Derek Sullivan didn't disappear from the earth. But he disappeared from Jasmine's life so completely it was as if he'd never existed. Min-jae's tech associate worked through the night, executing the digital erasure. Every shared bank account was closed, funds divided and transferred to new accounts in Jasmine's name only. Every bill that had been in both their names was switched to Jasmine's name, giving her the credit history and financial independence she'd been denied. Derek's access to her phone records, her email, her social media, all severed. And her visa. That was handled through Min-jae's legitimate legal team, the lawyers who managed his real estate empire. They filed the paperwork for Jasmine to have independent residency status, completely separate from any sponsor or relationship. It would take a few weeks to process, but it was already in motion. By sunrise Monday morning, Jasmine Williams was legally, financially, and physically free of Derek Sullivan. She just didn't know it yet. Jasmine woke up confused. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. The bed was too comfortable, the sheets too soft, the room too quiet. Then it came back in a rush, Derek's rage, her split lip, running to the only place that felt safe. The Park estate. Min-jae's guest suite. She sat up slowly, every muscle in her body aching. Her jaw throbbed. Her eye was swollen. But she was safe. That was the thought that kept circling through her mind. She was safe. The clock on the nightstand read 8:30 a.m. She'd slept for over 8 hours, the first uninterrupted sleep she'd had in months. No jolting awake to check if Derek was beside her. No monitoring her breathing to make sure she didn't disturb him. Just sleep. Real deep healing sleep. She got up and looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. The bruises looked worse in daylight, dark purple and yellow-green, the kind that would take weeks to fade. Her lip was still split, her eye still swollen. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who'd been hit. But she also looked like something else. A woman who'd survived. A woman who'd made a choice to leave, even when leaving seemed impossible. She washed her face carefully, changed into the clean clothes Min-jae had left for her, and ventured out of the guest suite. The house was quiet but not empty. She could hear sounds from the kitchen, the gentle clink of dishes, the soft hum of a refrigerator, the smell of coffee and something cooking. She found Min-jae in the kitchen, standing at the stove, attempting to make what appeared to be pancakes. He was dressed casually, just slacks and a simple shirt, no tie, no business armor. He looked almost normal. Domestic even. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and his expression did something complicated. Relief, concern, anger at whoever had hurt her, all carefully controlled beneath his usual composure. He asked if she'd slept. She nodded. He told her to sit, that breakfast was almost ready, that she should eat something. There was something surreal about the moment. This powerful, dangerous man making her pancakes in the morning light like they were old friends, like this was normal, like her world hadn't completely shattered 12 hours ago. They ate in careful silence for a few minutes. Then Jasmine asked the question she was terrified to ask. What about Derek? Min-jae set down his coffee cup and looked at her directly. Derek is gone. He left Korea this morning. He won't be coming back. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Jasmine felt everything at once. Disbelief, how could Derek just be gone just like that? Fear, what had Min-jae done to make that happen? Relief, overwhelming, dizzying relief that she might actually be free. And guilt that she felt relieved, guilt that she'd brought her problems to Min-jae, guilt that someone else had to solve what she couldn't solve herself. She asked how. How did he leave? Why would he leave? Min-jae's answer was carefully constructed. He'd made Derek an offer he couldn't refuse. Derek had gambling debts, employment problems, legal issues that were about to catch up with him. Min-jae had provided a solution. Leave Korea, start over somewhere else, avoid the consequences that were coming for him anyway. Derek had made the logical choice. It wasn't a lie exactly. But it wasn't the whole truth either. The whole truth included the warehouse, the fear in Derek's eyes, the implicit threat of what would happen if Derek refused. But Jasmine didn't need to know that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She asked what happened next. What was she supposed to do now? Where was she supposed to go? Min-jae's offer was simple and surprisingly generous. She could keep her position if she wanted it. He still needed an estate manager and she was good at the work. She could stay in the guest house temporarily while she figured things out. He'd help her find her own apartment when she was ready. There was no pressure, no timeline, no conditions. Jasmine looked at him with suspicion and confusion. Why was he helping her? What did he want from her? Min-jae was quiet for a long moment. Then he told her the truth. Because no one helped my mother. And I've lived with that my whole life. The vulnerability in those words cracked something open between them. Min-jae told her about his mother, about the bruises he'd seen as a child, about the violence he'd been too young to stop, about finding out years later that everyone had known and no one had intervened, about the guilt that had shaped every choice he'd made since. He'd built his rules around that guilt. Protect family. Never harm women or children. Create a world where he had enough power that he'd never be helpless again. But power meant nothing if you didn't use it when it mattered. Jasmine understood something then. This wasn't charity. This wasn't even kindness, not exactly. This was Min-jae trying to rewrite a history he couldn't change. She was his second chance at doing what he wished someone had done for his mother. She told him her story too. Not the simplified version she'd given herself to make the shame bearable, but the real one. How she'd stayed because leaving felt impossible. How Derek had isolated her so completely that she'd forgotten she'd ever been strong. How financial control had felt like love at first and like a cage later. How she convinced herself that if she just tried harder, was better, was quieter, maybe he'd stop. They talked for 2 hours in that kitchen. Not employer and employee. Just two people who'd both been shaped by violence. One as a witness, one as a victim, trying to understand how to live with what they'd experienced. There was no romantic implication in that conversation. Not yet. But there was something deeper. A mutual understanding, a recognition of shared wounds, a foundation of honesty that most relationships never achieve. When they finally finished talking, Jasmine asked one more question. What happens if Derek comes back? Min-jae's answer was simple and absolute. He won't. The certainty in his voice made Jasmine realize just how much power Min-jae actually wielded. And for the first time, instead of being frightened by that power, she felt protected by it. Recovery isn't linear. It's not a steady upward climb where each day is better than the last. It's messy and complicated and full of setbacks that feel like failures even when they're part of the process. The first week, Jasmine jumped at every sound. A car door closing outside sent her heart racing. The ring of Min-jae's phone made her flinch. She checked her own phone constantly, expecting threatening messages from Derek that never came. She kept waiting for him to appear, to pound on the door, to drag her back to the life she'd escaped. But he never did. She stayed in the guest suite, not quite ready to resume her normal work but not ready to leave either. Min-jae gave her space, checking in occasionally but never hovering. He had his own work, his own life, his own empire to run. But he made sure she knew she wasn't alone. The second week brought a subtle shift. The constant panic began to fade, replaced by a cautious, fragile calm. Jasmine started sleeping through the night again. Started eating without her stomach churning. Started to remember what it felt like to take a full breath without fear. One evening, Min-jae was in the kitchen attempting to cook dinner, another ambitious failure involving too much garlic and slightly burnt vegetables. Jasmine wandered in, watched him struggle with the stove, and without thinking made a comment about how he could run an international criminal empire but couldn't manage a simple stir-fry. The words were out before she realized what she'd said. For a moment she froze, terrified she'd crossed a line. Min-jae just laughed. Actually laughed. A real, genuine sound that transformed his entire face. He agreed that his skills were oddly distributed and suggested that perhaps she should take over the cooking before he burned the house down. It was the first time Jasmine had laughed in months. Really laughed, not the nervous, performative laughter she'd used to placate Derek. The sound surprised her, and then it made her laugh harder, until tears were streaming down her face and she wasn't sure if she was laughing or crying or both. Min-jae handed her a tissue and told her that burnt stir-fry was apparently his secret talent. That moment marked something. A turning point. A reminder that joy still existed, even after trauma. By week 3 they'd established a routine. Dinner together twice a week, usually with Jasmine cooking and Min-jae assisting with varying degrees of competence. They'd talk about books. She'd finished reading through his collection and had started bringing her own recommendations. They'd debate philosophy, discuss her graduate school options, argue about whether Seoul or her hometown had better weather. They never talked about his business. Never discussed the phone calls he took in Korean that ended with people sounding nervous. Never acknowledged the late-night meetings in his study with men who looked like they could break bones without breaking a sweat. It was an unspoken agreement. She didn't ask about his world and he didn't pull her into it. Month 2 brought more significant changes. Jasmine enrolled in online graduate courses, picking up the educational dreams she'd abandoned when Derek had convinced her she wasn't smart enough for academia. She started saving money in her own account with only her name on it, that no one else could access or monitor or control. The shift in their relationship was gradual but profound. Jasmine stopped being just Min-jae's housekeeper and became his estate manager. They worked together on projects, renovating parts of the house, managing his schedule, coordinating with his legitimate business operations. They collaborated as equals, her organizational skills complementing his strategic vision. Their growing connection was built on intellectual sparring and shared silences. The comfort of being in the same room, each doing their own work, not needing to fill the space with unnecessary conversation. The way they could debate intensely about literature or philosophy and then laugh about it over dinner. There was tension too. The kind neither of them acknowledged but both were aware of. The moment when their hands brushed while reaching for the same book. The way Min-jae's eyes lingered on her face when she was concentrating on something. The warmth Jasmine felt when he smiled at something she said. They both felt it. They both ignored it. Because Jasmine was still healing, still rebuilding herself, still learning how to exist without fear. And Min-jae was still convinced that he didn't deserve someone untouched by violence, that his world was too dark for someone trying to find the light. So they existed in this careful balance, deeply bonded, emotionally intimate, but maintaining a physical distance that felt necessary for reasons neither could fully articulate. It was enough. For now it was enough. Month 3 shattered their careful peace. Jasmine was in the library, working on an assignment for her graduate course, when her laptop pinged with a new email. She almost ignored it, probably spam or a promotional message. But something made her click. The email address was gibberish, clearly a burner account. No subject line. Just a message that made her blood run cold. I'm coming back for you. You think you can just leave me? You belong to me. I've been patient, but my patience has run out. I'll be in Seoul next month. We need to talk. Don't ignore me, Jasmine. You know what happens when you ignore me, Derek. Jasmine's hands started shaking. The room felt like it was tilting. All the safety she'd built over 3 months crumbled in an instant. He'd found her. He was coming back. He was going to... She didn't finish the thought. She grabbed her laptop and ran to find Min-jae. He was in his study, reviewing contracts. He looked up when she burst through the door, saw her expression, and immediately set everything aside. She showed him the email, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped the laptop. Min-jae read it once. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes went absolutely arctic. He asked her to sit down, that he was going to handle this, that she needed to breathe. He picked up his phone and made one call. He spoke in rapid Korean, his tone clipped and authoritative. Jasmine couldn't understand the words, but she understood the meaning. Someone was about to have a very bad day. When he hung up, Min-jae explained calmly what was going to happen. Derek was currently in the United States, Oregon specifically. He would receive a visit from some of Min-jae's associates in Boston. They would present him with evidence of his previous assault charge against Sarah Chin and new evidence of financial fraud that Min-jae's team had compiled. If Derek ever contacted Jasmine again, ever, through any means, that evidence would go directly to law enforcement. Derek would face prosecution, deportation proceedings if he tried to return to Korea, and the kind of legal nightmare that would destroy what remained of his pathetic life. The implicit message was clear. You're under my protection now. No one touches you. Min-jae delivered this information in the same calm tone he'd used to discuss the weather. But underneath it was something absolute, something final. Derek Sullivan had made his last threat. Jasmine sat there, processing what she'd just heard. Processing what it meant. Processing the full reality of who Min-jae Park actually was. She'd known intellectually. Had suspected. Had seen hints. But this was different. This was watching him casually deploy international criminal networks to solve a problem. This was understanding that his power wasn't metaphorical. It was real, immediate, and frankly terrifying. She asked the question that had been building for 3 months. Should I be afraid of you? Min-jae looked at her for a long moment. His answer was honest in a way that must have cost him something. I hope not. But I'd understand if you were. He didn't make excuses. Didn't try to soften what he was. He'd done terrible things, would probably do terrible things again. His world was built on violence and fear and power that most people couldn't imagine. He wasn't a good man, not by conventional standards. But he'd never hurt her. Would never hurt her. Would burn down anyone who tried. If that made her afraid of him, he'd understand. If she wanted to leave, he'd help her do that safely. If she needed distance from him and everything he represented, he wouldn't blame her. The choice was hers. It had always been hers. Jasmine sat with that choice. Really sat with it. She thought about Derek, who'd worn the mask of a good man while destroying her. She thought about Min-jae, who wore the reputation of a dangerous man while protecting her. She thought about the difference between violence that takes and violence that shields. She thought about the fact that Min-jae had given her choice when Derek had taken it away. Had given her safety when the world had abandoned her. Had seen her at her most broken and hadn't tried to keep her broken. She made her decision. She stayed. Not because she had nowhere else to go. By now she had options. Not because she was afraid of what would happen if she left. But because she chose to. Because staying meant something different than it had with Derek. Because Min-jae's darkness didn't frighten her the way it probably should. Maybe that said something about her. Maybe trauma had changed her in ways she was still discovering. Maybe she'd learned that the world wasn't divided into good people and bad people, but into people who protected and people who destroyed. Or maybe she was just falling in love with a man who lived in the shadows. She didn't say any of that out loud. Just told him she wasn't afraid. That she wasn't leaving. That she understood who he was and was choosing to stay anyway. Something shifted in Min-jae's expression. Relief maybe. Or gratitude. Or the beginning of allowing himself to hope for something he'd convinced himself he didn't deserve. They didn't kiss. Didn't fall into each other's arms. That's not how real healing works. But they sat together in that study, in the quiet acknowledgement of what they'd both chosen, and it felt like a beginning. Derek never contacted Jasmine again. The associates in Boston had been very clear about the consequences. He'd returned to his pattern, found a new woman, started the cycle over, convinced himself he was the victim in his own story. But Jasmine was beyond his reach now, protected by forces he couldn't fight and didn't fully understand. He lived quietly in Oregon, remarried eventually, and sometimes late at night, he'd remember the warehouse in Seoul and the cold eyes of Min-jae Park. He'd remember being given a choice and taking the coward's way out. He'd remember the woman he'd tried to break and wonder what had happened to her. But he never wondered hard enough to risk finding out. If this story is resonating with you, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. We're dedicated to sharing powerful stories about survival, justice, and the complicated nature of love and protection. Your subscription helps us continue bringing these important narratives to light. Here's a question I want you to think about. Jasmine chose to stay with someone she knew was dangerous. Do you think she made the right choice? Can you build a real relationship with someone whose world includes violence, even if that violence is never directed at you? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to hear different perspectives on this. 3 months had passed since Derek's email. 3 months of peace, of growth, of two people learning what it meant to choose each other in ways that were honest and complicated and real. But the hardest conversations were still ahead. And the transformation from protected to partner would require both of them to face truths they'd been carefully avoiding. The real test wasn't whether Jasmine could accept Min-jae's protection. It was whether she could accept all of him. The darkness and the light, the violence and the gentleness, the man who'd saved her and the man who'd destroyed others. That reckoning was coming. And it would change everything one more time. 6 months had passed since that email from Derek. 6 months since Jasmine had made the conscious choice to stay in Min-jae Park's world, knowing exactly what that world contained. And in those 6 months, everything had changed and nothing had changed all at once. Let me paint you a picture of transformation. Jasmine Williams at month 6 was barely recognizable from the woman who'd shown up at Min-jae's gate with a split lip and terror in her eyes. Her natural curls, once pulled back in that tight, apologetic bun, now framed her face in confident spirals. She'd gained back the weight that stress and fear had stripped away. Her shoulders no longer hunched forward in that universal posture of someone trying to take up less space in the world. She moved through the estate, through her life, with a kind of quiet authority that came from remembering who she'd been before Derek Sullivan had convinced her she was nothing. The graduate program she'd enrolled in was thriving under her attention. International Cultural Studies with a focus on cross-cultural communication and adaptation. She was writing her thesis on the experience of Black American expatriates in East Asia, drawing from her own journey in ways that transformed trauma into scholarship. Her professors praised her insight, her unique perspective, her ability to blend personal narrative with academic rigor. She still lived in the guest house on the estate. But here's the thing, it wasn't because she had nowhere else to go anymore. She had options now. Real options. Scholarship money. Savings in an account that only she could access. Job offers from international firms who'd heard about her work. She could have rented her own apartment in any neighborhood in Seoul. Could have moved into university housing. Could have gone anywhere. She chose to stay. The guest house had become hers in ways that went beyond just occupying space. She'd filled it with her books, her art, her music. Plants on every windowsill. Photographs of her family on the walls. The scent of her favorite candles mixing with the jasmine tea she drank every morning. It was no longer a temporary shelter. It was home. And Min-jae's estate? It had transformed too. For years, that massive house had been exactly what it looked like. A fortress. Beautiful, yes. Impressive, absolutely. But cold. Empty in the way that places become empty when they're designed to keep the world out rather than invite life in. Min-jae had lived there alone, surrounded by expensive furniture and first-edition books, protected by high walls and security systems, completely and utterly isolated. Now the house felt alive. Fresh flowers appeared in vases, Jasmine's doing, bringing color into rooms that had only known neutral tones. The kitchen actually got used for cooking meals instead of just making coffee at 3 in the morning. Music drifted through the hallways, sometimes jazz, sometimes Korean indie rock, sometimes the old soul music Jasmine had grown up with. There were dinner parties occasionally, carefully curated gatherings where Jasmine's academic friends mixed with Min-jae's legitimate business associates, conversations flowing in multiple languages, laughter echoing off walls that had forgotten what joy sounded like. The library, that beautiful, carefully organized library, had become their shared space. They'd spend evenings there, each reading their own books, occasionally sharing passages out loud, debating interpretations, arguing about philosophy and meaning and whether beauty could exist without pain. It was in that library that their intellectual connection had first sparked, and it remained the heart of their relationship. Their relationship. Let's talk about that complicated, undefined, deeply intimate thing they'd built. They weren't lovers. Not in the physical sense. 6 months in and they'd never crossed that line. Never shared a bed. Never let their careful emotional intimacy spill over into physical expression. But they were partners in every other sense that mattered. Min-jae consulted Jasmine on business decisions, the legitimate ones at least. Her insight into cross-cultural communication had proven invaluable for his international real estate ventures. She understood nuances of negotiation that came from living between cultures, from having to navigate the world as both insider and outsider. Jasmine relied on Min-jae's strategic mind when she faced challenges in her academic work. He could read her drafts and spot logical gaps she'd missed. Could push her thinking further without making her feel criticized. Could celebrate her successes in ways that felt genuine rather than patronizing. They cooked together. Well, Jasmine cooked while Min-jae provided increasingly competent assistance and entertaining commentary. They watched movies late at night, debating plot choices and character motivations with the same intensity they brought to philosophical discussions. They took long walks through the neighborhood, Min-jae pointing out architectural details, Jasmine sharing observations about the changing expat community in Seoul. They'd become each other's person. The first one they wanted to tell about good news. The one they turned to when things felt overwhelming. The presence that made everything else make sense. But they maintained this careful, unspoken distance. A boundary neither of them had explicitly established but both rigidly observed. The tension was killing them both. You could see it in the small moments. The way Jasmine's breath would catch when Min-jae's hand brushed hers while reaching for the same book. How Min-jae's eyes would linger on her face when she was concentrating on something, studying her like she was a text he was trying to understand. The split second of hesitation before they said goodnight and retreated to their separate spaces. The charged silence when they sat too close on the library sofa, both acutely aware of the inches between them, both refusing to be the one to close that distance. They wanted more. Both of them. But they were terrified of risking what they already had. Because what they had was precious and fragile and unlike anything either had experienced before. It was built on honesty and choice and mutual respect. It was safe. It was comfortable. It was real. And real things can break. Jasmine wrestled with questions that kept her up at night, staring at the ceiling of her guest house, trying to untangle her own heart. Could she love someone from Min-jae's world? Not just accept it, not just tolerate it, but truly love a man who'd built his empire on violence and fear? A man who'd probably killed people, certainly destroyed them, who operated in shadows that most people never glimpsed. She'd seen glimpses of that world now. Had been in the house when those tense, rapid-fire Korean phone calls happened. Had noticed when certain visitors left the estate looking pale and shaken. Had understood, without being told explicitly, that Min-jae's power wasn't just metaphorical or financial. It was literal and immediate and sometimes brutal. Could she love that? Could she build a life with someone whose hands had done terrible things, even if those hands had never hurt her, would never hurt her? Was she broken somehow for even considering it? Had Derek's abuse twisted something inside her so fundamentally that she was attracted to danger now, just in a different form? Or was this different? Was there a meaningful distinction between violence that destroys and violence that protects? Between men who hurt women and men who destroy the men who hurt women? Jasmine didn't know. And not knowing felt like a betrayal of something, her values, her safety, her sense of who she thought she was. Min-jae had his own demons keeping him awake at night. He'd sit in his study at 2, 3 in the morning, nursing whiskey he didn't really want, staring at the lights of Seoul, asking himself the same question over and over. Did he deserve someone like Jasmine? Someone good. Someone who'd survived hell and came out the other side choosing kindness. Someone who worked with underprivileged students in her spare time, who sent money back to her family, who cried at sad movies and laughed at terrible jokes and saw beauty in the world despite everything that world had done to her. What right did he have to want her? To imagine a future where she was his in all the ways that mattered? He was a criminal. Not a reformed one, not a retired one. An active, operating, deeply embedded criminal who ran an organization that thrived on fear and force. He'd killed people. More than he could count now if he was being honest. Some had deserved it. Some had just been in the way. He'd made peace with that violence because making peace was the only way to function, but making peace with something didn't make it right. And Jasmine? She deserved someone untouched by that darkness. Someone clean. Someone who could love her without carrying the weight of countless sins and moral compromises. Someone who wouldn't wake up from nightmares about blood and broken bones and the sounds men make when they realize they're not going to survive the night. She deserved better than him. That was the truth Min-jae carried like a stone in his chest. But here's the contradiction he couldn't resolve. He was also the man who'd saved her. Who'd seen her suffering and acted when the world had looked away. Who'd used his terrible power for something good, maybe the first truly good thing he'd done in years. Didn't that count for something? Or did it just prove he was selfish, that he'd helped her because he wanted to be her hero, wanted to rewrite his failure to save his mother, wanted to ease his own guilt more than he wanted to help her? These are the questions that haunted Min-jae Park. These are the thoughts that kept him alone in his study while the woman he was falling in love with slept 50 yards away, equally alone, equally uncertain. And so they continued their careful dance. Close but not too close. Intimate but not physical. Partners in everything except the one thing they both wanted. Something had to break. Someone had to risk everything they built for the possibility of something more. That moment came on a Tuesday evening in late autumn, 6 months to the day since Derek's email had shattered their peace. The rain started around 7 p.m., that heavy, relentless Seoul rain that sounds like drums on the roof and turns the city into a blur of neon reflected in puddles. Thunder rolled across the sky, deep and resonant, the kind that you feel in your chest. Min-jae was in the library, his usual evening refuge. He'd been reading the same page for 20 minutes, the words refusing to penetrate because his mind was elsewhere. On Jasmine specifically. Always on Jasmine lately. She appeared in the doorway around 8, hair damp from running between the guest house and the main building, carrying 2 mugs of tea because she knew he forgot to eat or drink when he was brooding. She handed him one without a word and settled onto the opposite end of the sofa, their usual configuration, that careful distance maintained. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the rain, occasionally commenting on passages in their respective books. The kind of easy companionship that had become their refuge. Then Jasmine set down her tea and her book. Turned to face him fully. Her expression was serious, determined, maybe a little scared. "I need to know what happened to Derek that night," she said. Her voice was steady, but Min-jae could hear the current of something deeper underneath. "The real story. Not the sanitized version you gave me. I need to know what you did." Min-jae felt something tighten in his chest. They'd maintained this unspoken agreement to never discuss the specifics of that night. To let it remain vague, undefined, easy to live with. She was asking him to break that agreement. To show her the full truth of what he was capable of. He could refuse. Could deflect. Could maintain the comfortable fiction that let them coexist without confronting the darkness directly. But he'd promised himself, when Jasmine chose to stay, that he would never lie to her. That honesty, brutal and uncomfortable as it might be, was the only foundation they could build on. So he told her. He told her about the warehouse in Seongsadong. About Derek's fear when he realized the situation he was in. About laying out every piece of Derek's life. The debts, the previous girlfriend, the restraining order, the pattern of abuse. He told her about the choice he'd given Derek. Leave Korea with money and clean debts, or stay and face consequences that would destroy him. Legal consequences, but also the kind that left men broken in ways that hospitals couldn't fix. And then he told her the hardest truth. The one that revealed exactly what kind of man Min-jae Park was. "I gave him a choice," Min-jae said quietly, his eyes on hers, unflinching. "He took it. But I need you to understand something, Jasmine. I would have preferred he didn't. I wanted him to refuse. I wanted an excuse to make him suffer for what he'd done to you. Not to kill him, that would have been too easy. But to hurt him in ways he'd never forget. To make sure every time he looked in the mirror or used his hands or felt fear in the dark, he'd remember what happens when you touch something that doesn't belong to you." The words hung in the air between them, brutal in their honesty. Jasmine's voice was barely above a whisper. "You would have tortured him." Min-jae didn't flinch from the word. "Yes. I've done worse for less. I've hurt people who posed a threat to my business, my family, my interests. I've killed men who crossed lines far less significant than the ones Derek crossed. And I felt nothing. No guilt. No remorse. That's who I am, Jasmine. That's what I'm capable of." He paused, making sure she was really hearing him. Really understanding. "But here's what I need you to know. With Derek, it wasn't about protecting my interests. It was about you. About giving you the choice I never gave my mother's abuser. I was 12 years old when I realized what my father was doing to her. I did nothing. I was too young, too powerless, too afraid. She died still trapped in that nightmare, and I've carried that failure every day since." His voice cracked slightly, the first time Jasmine had ever heard emotion fracture his careful control. "When you showed up at my gate that night with your face split open, I saw her. I saw every woman who's ever been trapped by a man who was supposed to love her. And I had the power to do what I couldn't do at 12. So I did it. Not because I'm good. Not because I'm noble. But because I refused to be that helpless child again." The rain continued its relentless percussion against the windows. Thunder rolled somewhere in the distance. The library that had always felt like a sanctuary suddenly felt small, close, charged with something electric. Jasmine processed his words. Really processed them, not just hearing but understanding the full weight of what he was confessing. "You're not a good man," she said finally. It wasn't a question. Min-jae's smile was bitter, resigned. "No. I've made peace with that. I know what I am. I've chosen this life, these methods, this darkness. I don't pretend otherwise. I don't dress it up in noble justifications or tell myself I'm misunderstood. I'm a criminal. I've hurt people. I'll probably hurt more people before I'm done. And the worst part? Most of the time I don't feel bad about it. It's just what I do. Who I am." He looked at her directly, and his next words felt like a confession and a warning all at once. "That's why I've kept my distance from you, Jasmine. Why we haven't, you deserve better than someone who lives in this world. Someone who can offer you a normal life. Someone untouched by the violence that defines me. You've survived one monster. You don't need to tie yourself to another one, even if this one happens to be on your side." The silence that followed felt infinite. Jasmine stood up from the sofa. For a moment, Min-jae thought she was leaving, thought this was the moment she'd finally see him clearly and choose to run, and he wouldn't blame her, couldn't blame her. But she didn't leave. She crossed the small distance between them and knelt in front of him, her eyes level with his, her hands reaching for his face with deliberate gentleness. "You're wrong," she said softly. "You're a better man than you think you are." Min-jae started to protest, but she pressed her fingers against his lips, silencing him. "Listen to me. You think you're a monster because you've done monstrous things. You think you're irredeemable because you've killed and hurt and lived in darkness. And maybe by some conventional measure of morality you're right. Maybe you are all the terrible things you think you are." Her eyes were fierce now, burning with conviction. "But you're also the man who saw a woman suffering and couldn't look away. Who used every terrible skill and connection and power you have to give her freedom. Who has spent 6 months treating me like I matter, like my thoughts and feelings and choices are important. Who has never once tried to control me or manipulate me or make me feel small. Who reads philosophy at 3 in the morning and argues about the meaning of beauty and makes terrible stir-fry and laughs at my jokes even when they're not funny." She moved closer, her voice dropping to something intimate and absolute. "You want to know what I think? I think a truly bad man wouldn't struggle with these questions. Wouldn't lie awake wondering if he deserves happiness. Wouldn't keep his distance from someone he cares about because he's afraid of corrupting them. A truly bad man would take what he wants and justify it however he needs to." Tears were forming in her eyes now, but her voice stayed steady. "And you want to know something else? Every good person in my life looked away when Derek was destroying me. My coworkers saw the bruises and said nothing. My friends stopped calling. The landlord who heard me crying through the walls did nothing. The bank teller who saw my hands shaking when Derek controlled our accounts did nothing. All those good, normal, law-abiding people who would never hurt anyone themselves, they let it happen. They chose their comfort over my survival." She let that sink in for a moment. "But you, with all your darkness and violence and complicated morality, you're the one who stepped in. You're the one who gave me my life back. So don't you dare tell me I deserve better than you. Don't you dare make that choice for me. I survived Derek by learning to trust my instincts about people. And every instinct I have tells me that you're the safest place I've ever known." And then Jasmine Williams kissed Min-jae Park. It wasn't tentative or uncertain. It was a choice, deliberate and clear, a statement of everything she just said. Her hands framed his face, her lips found his, and the careful distance they'd maintained for 6 months collapsed in an instant. For a moment Min-jae froze. Years of control, of discipline, of denying himself anything that felt too good or too pure warred with the overwhelming need to kiss her back, to pull her close, to accept what she was offering. Then something broke inside him, some wall he'd built between himself and the possibility of being loved despite everything he was, and he surrendered to it. He kissed her back with every ounce of feeling he'd been suppressing for months. His hands moved to her waist, pulling her closer, and she came willingly, settling into his lap, her arms around his neck, her body pressed against his like she was trying to erase any remaining distance between them. They kissed like people who'd been starving for each other, like all the unspoken longing of 6 months was pouring out in this single moment. The rain continued outside, thunder providing percussion, the library becoming a world unto itself where nothing existed except the two of them finally allowing themselves to want each other. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Min-jae's hands still on her waist, Jasmine's fingers tangled in his hair, he tried one more time to give her an out. Are you sure? His voice was rough, barely controlled. Once you're fully in my world, once this becomes real, there's no going back to comfortable distance. You'll know things. See things. Be connected to all of this in ways that could put you in danger. I can protect you, but I can't make you innocent of what I am anymore. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want? Jasmine's smile was radiant and sure and absolutely unafraid. I'm already in your world, Min-jae. I've been in it since the night I showed up at your gate. I've made my choice every single day I've stayed. Every meal we've shared, every conversation we've had, every moment I've felt safe because of you, those were all choices. This is just me finally choosing all of you, not just the parts that are easy to accept. She kissed him again, softer this time, more tender. I choose to stay. Not because I have nowhere else to go. Not because I'm afraid of being alone. But because I want this. I want you. All of you. The darkness and the light. The violence and the gentleness. The man who destroys his enemies and the man who makes me terrible pancakes on Sunday mornings. Her eyes held his, absolutely certain. I choose you, Min-jae Park. Exactly as you are. And Min-jae, who'd spent 23 years convinced he didn't deserve softness or love or anything good and pure, finally let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, he could have this. Could have her. Could build something real with someone who saw him completely and chose him anyway. I love you, he said. Simple words, but they carried the weight of everything he'd never let himself feel, never let himself want. I know, Jasmine said, smiling. I've known for months. I was just waiting for you to catch up. They stayed there in the library while the storm raged outside, holding each other, talking in soft voices about what came next, making promises and plans and allowing themselves to imagine a future together. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't simple. But it was theirs, built on brutal honesty and conscious choice and the understanding that love doesn't always look like fairy tales. Sometimes it looks like this, messy and complicated and absolutely real. 1 year later, Jasmine Williams defended her master's thesis to a panel of professors who praised her groundbreaking work on cross-cultural identity and resilience. She walked out of that conference room with her degree secured, job offers from 3 international cultural consulting firms waiting in her inbox, and a future that was entirely her own creation. She still lived at the estate. Not in the guest house anymore, that had been converted into her office space, a sanctuary filled with books and research materials and the organized chaos of someone deeply engaged in meaningful work. She lived in the main house now, in Min-jae's space, their space, a home they'd built together out of honesty and choice and the decision to love each other despite, maybe because of, how complicated that love was. She worked as an international cultural consultant now, helping companies navigate the complexities of cross-cultural communication, drawing from her unique experience of living between worlds, of understanding what it meant to be both insider and outsider. Her specialty was helping organizations understand power dynamics and implicit bias, work that felt like taking her own trauma and transforming it into something that could help others. Min-jae's world hadn't changed. He was still exactly what he'd always been, a criminal operating in the shadows, wielding power through fear and force and strategic calculation. Jasmine knew more about that world now. Not everything, he still protected her from the worst of it, but enough. She knew when he had to make hard decisions. Knew when someone had crossed him and faced consequences. Knew that the hands that held her so gently had also destroyed others. It should have bothered her more than it did. Maybe that meant something about how Derek's abuse had changed her, had recalibrated her understanding of danger and safety. Or maybe it meant she'd simply learned that morality wasn't as black and white as she'd once believed. That the world was full of people who looked good while doing nothing, and people who looked dangerous while doing what no one else would. She'd made her peace with loving someone who lived in the shadows. With being the light he came home to, knowing what he'd done in the darkness. As for Derek Sullivan? He was living quietly in Portland now. He'd remarried, another woman he'd swept off her feet with charm and promises, another woman he was probably slowly isolating and controlling. The cycle continuing because men like Derek rarely learn, rarely change, rarely face real consequences. But he never contacted Jasmine again. Never tried to find her. Never even searched her name online, because doing so would trigger alerts that Min-jae's tech associates had put in place, and Derek remembered the warehouse in Seoul. Remembered Min-jae's cold eyes and colder promises. Remembered that there were some men you didn't cross, some threats you took seriously, some lessons you learned the first time. He lived with that fear as his constant companion. The knowledge that somewhere across the ocean, a dangerous man was watching, waiting, ready to destroy him completely if he ever forgot his place. It was the closest thing to justice Derek would ever face. And somehow that felt appropriate. Jasmine rarely thought about him anymore. He'd lost his power over her the night she'd run to Min-jae's gate. Every day since had been a choice to move forward, to heal, to build something new. Derek was just a chapter in her story now, a painful one, yes, but not the defining one. The defining chapter was this: a woman who'd learned she was stronger than the worst thing that had ever happened to her. Who'd discovered that asking for help wasn't weakness but wisdom. Who'd chosen to love someone complicated and dangerous and deeply good in ways the world would never recognize. Jasmine reflected on her journey sometimes, usually late at night when she and Min-jae sat in their library, reading or talking or simply existing together in comfortable silence. She traced the path from victim to survivor to woman who'd chosen her own way forward, and feel amazed at her own resilience. She'd been broken. She'd been trapped. She'd been convinced she had no options, no power, no future beyond survival. And now she was thriving. Building a career she was passionate about. Living in a relationship built on honesty and respect and conscious choice. Making decisions about her life that were entirely her own. She'd reclaimed herself, piece by piece, and become someone even stronger than who she'd been before Derek. That's what survival looks like sometimes. Not just getting through the trauma but transforming it into fuel for becoming more fully yourself than you've ever been. And Min-jae? He reflected on his own transformation in quieter ways. He was still the same man who ran a criminal empire with ruthless efficiency. Still capable of violence that would horrify most people. Still operating in shadows that he'd probably never fully leave. But he'd also found something he'd thought was forever beyond his reach: redemption. Not the kind that comes from leaving his world or pretending to be someone he wasn't. But the kind that comes from using his terrible power to protect someone who needed protecting. From giving someone the choice his mother had never been given. From being, for one person at least, exactly the kind of man he'd wished had existed when he was 12 years old and helpless. He couldn't save his mother. Could never undo that failure or erase that guilt. But he'd saved Jasmine. And in saving her, he'd saved some part of himself too, the part that had been dying slowly since he was a child, crushed under the weight of witnessing suffering he couldn't stop. He loved her. Fully, completely, without reservation. Loved her strength and her resilience and her ability to see past the monster to the man underneath. Loved that she challenged him intellectually, matched him philosophically, made him laugh when the darkness felt too heavy. Loved that she'd chosen him with full knowledge of what he was, not despite it but including it. Their relationship wasn't conventional. Wasn't simple. Wasn't the kind of love story that anyone would hold up as an ideal. But it was theirs. Built on a foundation of brutal honesty and conscious choice and the understanding that sometimes love means seeing someone's darkness and choosing to be their light anyway. If you've made it this far in this story, if it's moved you or made you think or touched something in your own experience, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. We're dedicated to sharing powerful stories about survival, justice, and the complicated nature of love and protection. Stories that don't shy away from difficult truths or easy answers. Your subscription helps us continue bringing these important narratives to light, and it means the world to us. So hit that subscribe button and join us for more stories that matter. Here's my final question for you, and I really want to hear your thoughts on this. What would you have done in Jasmine's position? Could you love someone who lived in the shadows, who'd done terrible things, even if those things were never directed at you? Is there a meaningful difference between violence that destroys and violence that protects? Can you build a real, healthy relationship with someone whose world includes darkness, or is that just another form of danger? I know these aren't easy questions. I know there are no clear answers. But that's what makes this story worth telling. It exists in that gray area where morality gets complicated and love doesn't look like fairy tales. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me if you think Jasmine made the right choice. Tell me if you could make that choice yourself. Tell me where you draw the line between protection and possession, between safety and danger, between accepting someone's darkness and enabling it. I'm genuinely curious and I read every comment. Because here's the truth that this story illuminates. Love doesn't always look like fairy tales. Sometimes it looks like a dangerous man choosing mercy when he could have chosen vengeance. Sometimes it looks like a broken woman choosing to trust again when every instinct tells her to run. Sometimes it looks like two people who've both seen the absolute worst of humanity deciding to be each other's best. Each other's light in the darkness, each other's reason to believe that redemption is possible even for those who probably don't deserve it. Jasmine and Min-jae found something real in the most unexpected place. Built something lasting out of broken pieces. Created a love story that defied every conventional narrative about what love should look like, who deserves it, and how it's supposed to work. And maybe that's the most important lesson of all, that healing doesn't always look like walking away from danger. Sometimes it looks like finding someone who uses their power to give you yours back. That strength doesn't always mean doing it alone. Sometimes it means being brave enough to accept help from unexpected sources. That love doesn't always mean finding someone perfect. Sometimes it means finding someone who sees your brokenness and your beauty simultaneously and chooses you anyway. This is a story about forbidden love, yes. About finding safety in the most unexpected places. About the razor-thin line between protection and possession, between the dangerous men who destroy you and the dangerous men who destroy anything that tries to harm you. This is a story about how sometimes, not always but sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room is the only one who can save you. And how learning to tell the difference between danger that threatens you and danger that shields you might be one of the most important survival skills you'll ever develop. This is Jasmine Williams' story. This is Min-jae Park's story. This is a story about second chances and conscious choices and the complicated, messy, beautiful reality of building a life with someone who lives in the shadows. And now it's your story too. What you take from it, what you learn from it, what you think about it, that's up to you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying with us through this journey. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more powerful stories about love, justice, and second chances. We're here every week with narratives that matter, stories that make you think, tales that remind us that humanity is complicated and beautiful and sometimes finds light in the darkest places. Until next time, remember, your story isn't over. No matter how broken you feel, no matter how trapped you seem, no matter how impossible freedom looks, your story isn't over. And sometimes, just sometimes, help comes from the most unexpected places. Take care of yourselves. And take care of each other.